Welcome to a very special boxing scene today. Well, we all know about Crawford versus Canelo, the big fight this weekend. Millions will be watching, thousands will be in attendance, but one who will not be in attendance, at least with a media credential, Lance Pugmire from BoxingScene Today, denied a credential by, of course, the event and promotion itself. Got to break that down. A very important story. Any of your comments, concerns about any story, remember, hashtag BoxingScene Today. Let us know what you think. And also with this breaking story, I don't just have Paulie Malignaggi and Chris Algieri joining me. As always, we have Boxing Scene's own Eric Raskin, who wrote the article about the story, joining us. Eric, thank you so much. Great article, goes over the details from start to finish. First question I have, how surprised are you that this happened? How prepared were you for it?
Hey, Jimmy, great to be on the show with you guys. If you're asking specifically how surprised I am by Lance Pugmire getting his credential denied for this week, I would say not surprised at all. It follows a pattern of everything that's been going on with boxing scene with regard to Riyadh season and the ring promoted events over the past year or so. How surprised am I that this situation exists? If you had asked me a couple years ago, would I see a day where a media outlet would be entirely banned from covering a major promoter's events? Yeah, that's surprising. That's a deeply unfortunate twist for the entire boxing media, not just for boxing scene, but for what it means for everyone else. As I talk about in the article, the culture of fear being cultivated when you start acting this way with regard to one media outlet and the way that it spreads to other media outlets. That's a big problem. But so to focus specifically on boxing scene not being credentialed for this major fight, it's not a surprise. It's entirely par for the course. I guess the surprise is that they initially said Lance would be credentialed for the event and then pulled it out on him.
Yeah, Eric, that's what I read in the article as well. First of all, we're going to preface it that Lance is an award-winning boxing journalist. He's not just any journalist, I mean, at boxing scene has a long history within the business now, a decade or two, where for a while it was the premier boxing news site, still is among the top boxing news sites. And Lance himself is an award-winning writer with big credentials. So originally he was accepted, and then they denied it, and there was not really much information as to reasoning for that. What was that about?
Yeah, and that also follows a bit of a pattern. There are some other incidents that I mentioned in the article that where certain boxing scene writers thought they were going to an event or were invited to a media day, and then it had it taken away from them at the last second. So yeah, with regard to Lance here, not only is he universally respected, but I don't think he's one of those guys. I don't think anyone could possibly say a bad word about Lance Pugmire. So it certainly doesn't have to do with him specifically, individually. It obviously has to do with the media outlet. And it seems like a case based on the response that our editor, Matt Christie, got when he complained and asked for an explanation and all that. It would seem that the explanation that he received from a representative of UFC and TKO Boxing was basically, I don't know, not our call. There must have been an issue with someone else involved, and we all know who that someone else involved is. We're talking about Riyadh season and Turki al-Sheikh. So I think what seems to be happening is that other entities that are involved in these shows go through the credentials that are applied for, and sometimes someone will say, sure, boxing scene, Lance Pugmire, why not? And then it gets all the way up the ladder. And this is me sort of inferring. This is not me knowing that this is the procedure, but that it goes up the ladder, and somewhere when you get to the higher rungs, they say, oh, no, we can't, we're not giving them a credential. That appears to be what happened here with Lance.
Yeah, Eric, I read the article. It was very, very interesting and well done. I thought of there was two things two little quotes that you had in that I really liked. You said, something around the idea of a media that's operating in fear turns from an unbiased news sponsor to a cheerleader. and it becomes a PR arm for whoever the organization that seems to be in control and being heavy-handed with what's going out. And you mentioned, we talked about Lance Pugmire obviously giving his flowers for everything that he's been able to do. There's a lot of other very, very good writers on boxing scene, guys like Tris Dixon, Declan Warrington, who are running into the same thing. So it's not an individual thing. It's not like Lance is the problem. Where do you think this began? Because obviously it's a problem with the outlet itself, not the writers themselves. When did the seeds of this start to cultivate and show itself?
So the last event that Boxing Scene was credentialed for, that Riyadh Season was involved in promoting, was actually Terence Crawford's last fight, a little over a year ago, August of 2024 in Los Angeles. So as of then, no problems that I can trace. Ever since then, there's been a problem, and it wasn't long after that event that Tris Dixon wrote a detailed article about the concept of sports washing, the fact that and this is not really opinion, this is factual, that people on the Saudi side have stated this, that part of their interest in getting into boxing was to clean up the reputation of the entire nation, and putting all their money behind these events is to try to change the world's attitudes towards Saudi Arabia. That's sports washing, as simple as that. So when Tris wrote about that, again, kind of guessing here, but that would seem to have been a trigger point, a pivot point that started getting Boxing Scene barred from covering their events. It's continued every single thing that a Boxing Scene writer has applied for since then. And as I noted in the story, it's not only Boxing Scene. It's been mostly us. There aren't too many others, but there was also notably a writer for The Telegraph who wrote an article in advance of the Joshua Dubois fight that highlighted the sports washing aspect. It ran a couple days before the fight, and at that point he was told he was no longer credentialed, and he has no connection to Boxing Scene. So the common thread there would be, you mentioned sports washing, and you're on the not allowed
The
into
no-fly
our events
list.
list. Yeah.
Yeah, Eric, I actually had heard something else about somebody that had worked on DAZN, where when originally they were running into head-on collisions with the sanctioning bodies, I forget the guy's name. He worked for DAZN and he had his own podcast. Maybe it'll ring a bell with somebody or with you guys, but he mentioned on his podcast how this may not be a good idea to go head-on with the sanctioning bodies and whatnot, which has actually ironically been a talking point this week. But that guy also was eliminated from his job on the broadcasts. I'm not sure if you know who it is. I forget his name. But
is it Ade? Is that
might be him? Might be him.
about?
Yeah, might be him. Yeah, and he was. That's it. He was canned just like that for just inferring that it may not be a good idea. The issue there is, even here we've been very complimentary in spots of Riyadh season. I think personally, from myself and our guys, we've been more complimentary than critical, but if it's only complimentary, you basically, like we were talking about, you're just basically becoming a PR firm and a PR arm of the company, and not really media. That's no longer media, that's totalitarianism. Because even from my perspective, from my opinion, the critique that I've given was constructive. It was mostly we mostly were complimentary. The fights they make, the fights that were needed to be made, a great competition.
The fact the fighters are getting paid very
well.
The
fact the fighters are getting paid. The fact that there's upsets because, there's so many evenly matched fights. I loved all that, and I openly talked about it. But, there was also some critical stuff that we critiqued. But it was more so in the line of, maybe this could be better if we did it this way, or this could be better if we did it this way. And we don't have that power. Somebody like Turki Al-Ashik has that power. So we were kind of saying that in a way where, hey, maybe if you do it this way, it'll be even better. It wasn't really to get out of our business, but you got to have to have that thin of a skin, it kind of ends up hurting everybody. Because I can remember, ironically, you mentioned the Crawford and Madrimov fight. I can remember before that fight, Eddie Hearn and some people on the, connected to Riyadh season were contacting myself, Chris, Jimmy, about us going there because Turkey liked our shows and wanted to basically have us do our shows over there. And I can remember being excited about it. Honestly, I can remember,
Same.
like thinking, like, "Wow, this could be cool." Especially an event like Crawford Madrimov. I likened it by doing our daily talk shows over there. Would have been like SportsCenter doing the daily shows from the site of the Super Bowl on Super Bowl week, the way ESPN did back when I used to watch football. I don't know if they still do, but either way, I likened it to that, and I was kind of excited about it. And, we basically told the contacts that talked to us, like, hey, just speak to Gary, the boss, and, should be no problem. And nobody reached out to Gary. Turki didn't want to speak to Gary. And at that point, the realization came to us that it was Gary being held accountable for what was being written at Boxing Scene. But, having ownership of a media and actually controlling what it writes is two different things. You know what I mean? There's an open media concept in free countries of the West, and at least that's the way it's supposed to be, the way we're raised that it is. And so here at Pro Box and at Boxing Scene, we kind of have that concept. Gary doesn't really tell us what to say on our talk shows, and neither does he tell the writers what to write and what not to write on the articles. But you bring the. And
if you haven't noticed, our shows are not heavily edited for what we say, and in fact, me and Paulie go back. And
maybe they should be a little more, but they're not. Yeah.
But
we don't have an HR department yet.
But
so
we do not. But the thing is, there's a lot of praise, there's some criticism, and overall, we want the betterment of the sport, right? I mean, Eric, I think you agree. I think that's something we all want, but it just I don't know. It makes it kind of tough because. Where do you stand here? Now it goes to like where does a person have to stand here? Because either you're a cheerleader and you got to agree with everything like a pauper, or you're out. And this is a company that wants to take over the entire business. So this makes it a little bit tough because you use the word dissent. I don't know if it's so much dissent as much as sometimes it's just critical, constructive criticism. A lot of the criticism doesn't necessarily have to be dissent. It's constructive, and in a lot of ways, when we were talking about, we love I can remember one of the criticisms we had. We love what Riyadh Season is doing, but sometimes the crowds aren't as vivacious as they are in the West. So imagine if Riyadh Season could come to the West more often and do some of these live events in the West, where these monster fights that they put on that are so good would have the atmosphere to go along with it. And in some spots they've done that. They've gone to England to do Eubank and Ben. With
the LA show.
The LA show with Madrimov and Crawford obviously was there, and also the Canelo and Crawford is going to be in Vegas, right? So in some spots that we love that. I'm not saying don't go to Saudi Arabia and Riyadh Season, but I'm saying that was constructive criticism for me, because it wasn't something that I said, hey, you know what, this is BS. If you don't go to the West, this is something unwatchable. Absolutely not. I loved it. I still love it. When there's a fight signed from Riyadh Season, I think we all get excited. It's just, how do we balance this out? It's impossible without being a PR firm for this guy, and honestly, dude, Eric, I mean, I know some of these guys are your peers that work across the street on the other side, but if not for spineless reporters like that just go out and sell out for the money, if they had nobody to pay off, like basically like buying off and bribing your politician, or buying off and bribing your media. Because if there's nobody if everybody stands firm and toes the line, sort of like when the NFL will go on strike and they had to use scabs, right? It's like if everybody holds the line, then the totalitarianism has to soften up, and everybody can be a real media. But because there's spineless reporters that go across the street and they do that, I don't know, man. If you have any thoughts, Eric.
Paulie, spines are expensive, and this is a tough economy, so you got a lot of spineless guys out there who are just trying to make a buck.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Eric?
No, it's the concept of editorial independence, and you're right that dissent was maybe sort of not quite the perfect word for certain things in that article. That you can praise certain things, you can be excited about certain fights, you can celebrate that the Saudi money has gotten us some great fights that we absolutely would not have gotten otherwise. You can be critical, you can make suggestions, you can flat out dissent with things. That's what a free and independent media should be able to do. And when you refer to my colleagues across the street, you're talking specifically about the Ring magazine, which it's a personal thing for me to an extent, that my first 7.5 years in this business and in the working world in general throughout my 20s, I was an editor at Ring magazine. So I have history there. And for a long time, I cared a lot about that editorial product. when it was sold last year, I think we all had a pretty good sense of what was likely coming. But I wanted to give it a chance, just let them prove me wrong in assuming, or at least being skeptical, that they would retain their editorial independence. And we've seen just enough evidence. There's also all the things that I sort of heard off the record in my reporting that I couldn't get into too deeply because it was unsubstantiated, but just sort of suggesting the influence that Turkey has. But then there were the things that I got on the record about Jake Donovan when he was there, being told, take down that tweet. His Excellency doesn't like it, that sort of thing. And it's just you could, looking at the product of what they've published online in certain situations that have called for some criticism. The terrible Times Square show that no fans were allowed into, basically, to have not a hint of criticism about that situation anywhere on your website. There were a couple of other examples of what Turkey's tweet about Tim Zhu that a lot of other outlets were critical of, but you didn't see a peep on the Ring site. Things like that you see that the editorial independence is clearly gone. And I also had, just, you were mentioning the issues with I'm blanking on his last name right now, but I think his first name is Ade, the guy from DAZN, who at least right. So he temporarily at least lost his gig. I was hearing about that and some other things that were again couldn't get them substantiated, couldn't get people on the record. So I won't go into detail, but just suggesting that Turkey is also having a strong say, if not the flat out final word, over a lot of the on-air talent and who gets on and who's yanked off on short notice.
And Eric, I appreciate you, going to bat for journalistic integrity and use the word independence, which is absolutely true too. For this is what we're used to in terms of media bias. But I'd like to point something out as well, and I'm gonna go against what my esteemed colleague there, Paulie Malignaggi, likes to always say about UFC fans and how low their IQ is when it comes to certain things. But boxing fans aren't dumb, and if you go all one way, it's going to be very obvious. And even on my own podcast, people who call in and my listeners and the things that I receive from them are very intelligent. Boxing is a very nuanced, intelligent sport, and I think it takes a higher level of intelligence to really enjoy the sport for what it is. So our hardcore fans, they're not dumb enough to fall for a one-way street. So I think it's a point of diminishing returns if that's going to be the case, where you're only going to push one narrative, because it becomes it becomes so obvious, it loses all credibility. Right. And so not only are you here fighting for your own journalistic integrity and the integrity of boxing media on a whole, because if there isn't bias or if there isn't back and forth, then what's the point? But also for the fan base, for the fans themselves, for the sport itself. Because if the only media is going one way, you're going to lose the fans as well. And we're all here for more fans, bigger sport, we all do this because we love the sport. And I think Champ was saying this perfectly about, even the idea of even working with these shows was like, man, we were excited. This is going to be the Super Bowl. And it's really disheartening to see it going this way when it really doesn't need to. What's your take on that in terms of where the fans are and maybe their response to some of the writings and some of the one-way street mentality that you've seen?
Yeah, I'd like to think that most of the fans, especially the hardcore fans who've been following boxing closely all their lives, can pick up on that. And as you were talking there, Chris, it was actually making me think a lot about the guys who are calling fights, broadcasters, which something, you and Paulie have a wealth of experience calling fights. And I'm sure it's a bit of a tricky line to walk sometimes of, and you guys probably think this through to an extent every time you're calling a fight, is how much, if what I'm seeing in the ring is lousy, how much am I going to say, this is lousy, this is a terrible fight that you're getting right now? Because I think we see that in all broadcasts a lot of times. You're watching a fight, and it's not even just boxing. You're watching an NFL game, and it's a blowout in the fourth quarter, and they're trying to sell you on what a great game you're watching because they don't want you to turn the channel, right?
Nobody wants a homer broadcaster. Nobody wants the homer broadcaster. So you got to speak your truth.
Right. Right. No, ideally, and look, like Larry Merchant was famous for that. He would go on HBO and say, tonight we gave you garbage on HBO. And so it doesn't always have to be quite that blatant. But what you hate to see is that broadcast, that it feels like the whole show, as I'm watching these fights, the whole time they're trying to sell me on I'm watching great fights. I don't want that. Call the fights in front of you. So I think that that's something you guys have an experience with, and probably at times you start to want to say something, and in your mind, I'm sure there's a little voice like, do I want to go there? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So I think in an independent media, you feel the freedom to be as critical as you think the situation calls for. And so I just think with Turki Al-Sheikh owning a major media entity, we're seeing that freedom is not there. That the people who have chosen to continue to work there, look, I'm not going to judge anyone personally and the decisions that they make to make a living, but it's not for me. I wouldn't want to do that.
I want to say one thing from a personal aspect, and obviously I work with Chris and Paulie all the time. I have never, in all my years of calling combat sports, not sports entertainment, which is a totally different animal, combat sports, I have never, and I worked for Dana White, worked for the UFC, had them tell me, push this guy, don't push that guy, say this, don't say that. We are not.
Agreed.
Gary Jonas is not in our ear going, push our guy. What we do is we can be extremely critical of a fighter and their performance because that's on them. What generally, the only thing that in the past HBO sometimes would go, I remember Mayweather, it was Floyd Mayweather taking on Arturo Gatti, and Roy Jones Jr. went, I don't know why you would put him in the ring with Floyd Mayweather. Now you're criticizing the matchmaking itself. And I went, ugh. Like, now it's, who would put him in a ring with Floyd Mayweather? But the fighter themselves, their performance is on them. And I want to make it, as a broadcaster, play-by-play and color, I have never had a promoter go, that's our guy, get behind him, screw him, ever in my whole career. When a fighter doesn't do well, and Paulie says he didn't come here to fight tonight, that's on him, and the promoters understand that. And I've had a lot of fans go, I bet you said that because of this. Nope, not once in my career did Dana White pull me aside and go, no, that's our guy. What were you doing pushing that guy? If that guy didn't come to fight, promoters understand that's on him. And I think I speak for everybody behind the scenes here at Boxing Scene, of course, Extension Pro Box. We don't get that. Gary Jones doesn't pull us aside and go, push this guy, not that guy. If that guy didn't show up to defend his spot, that is his responsibility. Now, before I let you go, I have one question. I often say on air, bad coaching sounds like cheerleading. If my mom could say it, it's bad coaching. Go get him, champ. You got him. Go hard.
Throw more punches.
Right, throw more. Anything my mother could say from the front row is bad cornering. Bad media also sounds like cheerleading. Is that the fear that would be what we would slip into in terms of combat sports media?
Yeah, I think that's ultimately the big takeaway here is that if everyone is if one outlet is a cheerleader, that's bad enough. If everyone is a cheerleader, if everyone is feeling like I am not going to get access to these fights and these fighters, that's the other thing I talked about a lot about in the article is that interview opportunities that were granted and then taken away, or interviews that were conducted and then suppressed, things like that. If the entire media is walking on eggshells, worried that if they're critical of the kingdom, then they're not going to get they're not going to get the media access that we need, then all that's left is the cheerleaders. Now, thankfully we live in a world where there will still be independent media like Boxing Scene and like you guys doing your show on Pro Box out there able to speak honestly about what they're seeing and what they're observing. But losing the access is a big deal. And that's the road that we seem to be going down here. And some people are playing ball and just going along with it. And, even at Boxing Scene, from my editors, they were very hesitant to go down this road of exposing all of this stuff. It's been building for a while. And for a while, we said, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's not go overboard with this. And eventually it just reached that point where the time is right. We're clearly, our bed's been made here. Let's just report on everything we know because we need to put it out there. And so that's why this article finally came together this week. But this has really been an article that I think a lot of people at Boxing Scene have been thinking about writing for the past year or so.
And it's for the benefit of the fans and the health of the sport to have an open media. There's nothing beneficial about having a closed media and having a PR firm as the only media allowed to write. I think fans are more appreciative, and there's being more in the know as a whole within the business of everything I think is important because, people can create opinions and, also constructive criticism creates positive change as well. You know, you bring better things. I mean, a lot of the reasons, you know, why I wanted to train so hard was because sometimes the criticism was like, you know what, I can prove this and I can be better because of this. You know, sometimes it was, you know, it hurt a little bit, but you know what, it wanted me to become better. And then when I got better, you know, it was nice to see the praise from the media, you know? So, you know, it can also, that dynamic also can be a motivator as well. It's just, you know, again, the totalitarianism doesn't bring you that push, you know, to be better, to create a better product. And we always should be striving to create a better product.
And one more thing, and just in that same vein, Champ, it's like to build a better product, to get more views. You know, we're all doing this to get views, and get eyes, and get attention, right? Listen, a little bit of pushback gets more views. The friction, some of our best viewed shows were me and Paulie yelling at each other, and it's just that's the world that we live in. And you know, the interaction is important. If him and I were both on the same side all the time, which does happen quite a bit, and it makes it kind of a lame discussion. And sometimes you kind of want to push back and fight a different kind of way. But if you're all on the same side of the street, it just is not as entertaining. And at the end of the day, boxing is a fight. We're tuning in to watch a fight. We can have dissenting, I know that word again. We can have differing, how about that? Differing opinions, where you're going to go back and forth, because it's way more interesting that way. If we're all going the same way, it's not fun. It's not a fight. I want to fight. I want to fight with you. I want to fight with you in the barbershop. I want to fight with you on the Zoom. I want to fight with you in the crowd. I want to fight during the fight. You know, this is what makes this entertaining. This is why we all tune in. It's why we love this sport. So for the health of the sport on a whole, you gotta have differing opinions, man.
Yeah, and it's also not supposed to be taken personally, you know. It's all in good fun. At the end of the day, it's all in good fun.
We're thick-skinned guys, and Eric, I appreciate you joining us, man. I appreciate you jumping in and fighting with us, and I appreciate the fight you're putting up for responsible journalism. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Jimmy and Paulie and Chris. Always great talking to you guys.
Well, Paulie, Chris, and I will be here all week, of course, covering Canelo Crawford, the big fight coming up Saturday. What do you think of this story? Hashtag Boxing Scene Today. Let us know about what you think. Any questions you have, we'll deal with them on air. Tune in to Boxing Scene Today.